Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I hope you recovered from yesterday's rather long podcast. I remember my English teacher, Mrs. Davis, who was a wonderful teacher, once called me verbose, and she probably wasn't wrong in hindsight. I did an interview yesterday about the fast-moving and fluid events in Gabon, the failed coup. When I got on, it wasn't clear it was going to fail. But I said a number of things. One of the things I said was the captain has been out for a few months now, and that we're watching a very dynamic situation unfold. And indeed, we continue to watch a dynamic situation unfold as long as he's absent, I would have thought. And then I drew a correlation between Gabon, Sudan, and the DR Congo, and I said what we're watching across this continent, whether it's Gabon, Sudan, or DR Congo, is a kind of tipping point moment. I certainly think that Gabon, the street is not powerful enough to unseat the president, so therefore you would expect something like we saw yesterday. Sudan, the street is obviously on fire. The question is, can they sustain it? And in the DR Congo, we've got another very fluid situation, and Kabila so far has managed to keep a lid on the street. The question is, can he, in the event that he announces his Dauphin as the winner, in a situation where it's widely expected that the Shadari only got 20% of the vote, and my point is, given that he had the power of incumbency, 20% is a single-digit number. I also participated with Sami Zedan. It's a pleasure to have caught up with him frequently in the last few days about Zimbabwe's land reform. That link is also on the website. Moving on to Sub-Saharan Africa, Bashir will not budge. Nationwide protests in Sudan take aim at the president. This is the Washington Post. Protests began when Bashir's government announced a raft of price hikes to cope with spiraling inflation in mid-December. And thousands formed spontaneous, leaderless crowds, and not just in the capital Khartoum, but everywhere. Protests relatively spontaneous, decentralized. Sudan government shut off access to social media, but VPNs allowed the internet to remain a space not just for sharing information, but also for sharing graphic pictures and videos of wounded or killed protesters. Sudan's economy under Bashir has tanked, spends billions on defense contracts while skimping on health, education, and infrastructure. Tens of thousands of Sudanese have attempted the dangerous journey across the Sahara Desert to Europe. People started staring at someone on the roof of a building and started chanting at him that he was a sniper. But Mohammed Osman says the total collapse of Bashir's regime is neither an imminent nor a guaranteed outcome of these protests, saying that it all boils down to whether the protests can keep going strong. This is what I mean about the surge on the street. You've got to get beyond a certain level, or the regime has got to kill a large number of people. And it's certainly, I don't know what it is. Is it 10,000? Is it 1,000? Certainly not 100, which is probably killed already. Sahel Dean, what has happened lately is a serious turn in the path of Sudanese people towards revolution, but no matter what, I believe Bashir will not budge, will not resign. It's like someone who's found himself on the back of a lion. He can't get off without the lion devouring him. And he's also sent 10,000 militiamen to Saudi Arabia. He's hoping for some support from them. And the final point is you can only draw $15 a day out of the bank. And this goes to the point what we're watching across the continent, whether it's Gabon, Sudan, or DR Congo, is a kind of tipping point moment. I take you back to something I wrote in November 2014, Ouagadougou's signal to Sub-Saharan Africa. And I said then what's clear is that a very young, very informed, and very connected African youth demographic, which many characterize as a demographic dividend, which for beautiful Blaze turned into a demographic terminator, is set to alter The existing equilibrium between the rulers and the subjects and the rebalancing has begun. We need to ask ourselves, how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 1,000? 100? 10,000? And I said, this is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event. Therefore, the preeminent point to note is that protests in Burkina Faso achieved escape velocity. Overthrowing incumbents is all about acceleration, momentum, and speed, best characterized by the German word blitzkrieg. Role of women in Sudan uprising has been critical. Female protesters have told me they haven't seen anything like it. Recent waves, and it cuts across all sectors of society. This artwork is by Kandaka on Instagram, and Yusra El-Bashir alerted me to it. Yields on Gabon's 1.5 billion of sinkable bonds due December 2024 jumped the most since August, rising 54 basis points to 8.9%. Howard French tweeted, coup in Gabon, no more bongos, and then a few hours later, whoops, maybe no coup in Gabon, more bongos. Gabon may only produce about 200,000 barrels of oil per day, but per person it exports 10 times more than Nigeria, the third biggest oil exporter per capita. Democracies are not normal at this oil export quantity, says Charlie Robertson. Mark Boland, to illustrate the renewed fiscal challenges for Gabon in 2019. Have a look at this. This is pretty damning for the government. My piece over the weekend was about DR Congo's delayed election results, and I started by saying it's not the people who count that vote, it's the people who count the votes. V.S. Naipaul and Bend in the River, who said it isn't that there's no right and wrong here, there's no right. Have a read. I was actually calling for intervention by the US, saying that there's a clearer case in this than there was in Syria, and saying that, quoting Cheney, we will be greeted as liberators, they will throw rose petals at our feet. And I said, I can guarantee you the people of Congo will throw rose petals at their feet. Abiy's big steps shouldn't obscure undercurrents in Ethiopia. One of the biggest concerns is about the state's capacity to maintain the rule of law and guarantee security, which is degenerating. Interesting article. South African oil share down 1.47% this year. Dollar versus rand 13.94. Egyptian pound 17.9148. 9 months into the fiscal year, the federal government of Nigeria had collected 2.8 trillion Naira tax revenue, 53% below target. Explains part of MTN's 2018 drama, says Adrian Seville. The FT says Nigerians feel the economic pinch as the presidential election looms. At the new market in the Lekki area of Lagos, Joy Eno is painting a customer's toes bright yellow. It is one of the few bits of business she has done all day. Customers come, but not really that much because they don't have money and there's no jobs. The economy is not really good, said the 23-year-old beautician. The country's emerged from a recession brought on by a slump in oil prices. The economy grew at just 1.8% in the third quarter. Yvonne Mahango, who's the economist at RenCap, said growth in 2018 was well below the 3% she'd expected. We didn't appreciate how weak the consumer was and how much more it will take for the consumer to emerge from this slump. The article concludes by saying, I don't believe in the government of Nigeria. They're not going to make any change. They've been telling us forever that they'll fix the economy. On the 2nd of January, I said South Africa and Nigeria go to the polls in 2019, and both economies have been slow and need a positive catalyst. And I said one of the big risks for Nigeria is it gets walloped by a low oil price. The Nigerian oil share is down 3.28% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 0.41% this year. Prime Bank's main shareholder, Rasik Kantaria, seeds a 5.1 billion stake sale. This is the front page of Business Daily. Kenyan's earnings from tourism jumped by almost a third in 2018 from the previous year to $1.55 billion, after the number of visitors rose by 37%, the tourism ministry said on Monday. Have a look at this from Madui House, giving you the hard data around that tourism jump. That's a great result, but you know, it's highly fragile. One event somewhere in Kenya, anywhere in fact, can turn that very, very quickly. That's the problem with tourism. Nairobi all shares down 2.19% year to date. NSE 20 is down 2.21% year to date. A strategic investor who injects 3.5 billion shillings into Consolidated Bank through the purchase of preference shares will eventually own a controlling stake in the lender by converting them into equity. CDC, we got $268 million invested in Kenya in 74 companies. Thank you, always.